big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
So you've got Ben Johnson saying something about the Packers, which I forgot. You've got Matt LaFleur being like, yeah, whatever, basically. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. Nick Whalen, Usayd, Koshul here. You can check us out on Twitter @_ Nick Whalen, @Usayd, Koshul. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we're brought to you by the Bear Report. Check us out on Twitter @Halas Beat as well. I apologize because my voice is sort of messed up. You know, when it's 70 degrees in Illinois one day, and then it's 35 the next day, and then you go on outside without a hoodie, and then the wind comes in instantly, you're bound to sort of catch something. But there's a whole lot going on here, and I mean, this Bears-Packers rivalry, at least in our lifetime's sake, has never had coaches trash-talking each other, so it's truly a new era, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I kind of like it because if you go back far enough when it was, and if we're honest, y'all, a true rivalry when the Bears were winning, you know, Mike Ditka wasn't afraid to say anything, and you know the Packers weren't very good then, so that was the only time it was good for our side. But yeah, Ben Johnson was poking fun at LaFleur. I think there's a couple things for it, you know, because I mean, one that he's beat him, like you know, I think he's only lost to LaFleur maybe once as a coordinator, and I think part of it is I think LaFleur cares a lot. And like, so it gets under his skin. You could see today, like he's like, well, you know, and then how he reacted was like perfect. Like you just plant little seeds, and it's, you know, it's chess. You know, if you can get a little bit one step ahead inside one guy's head, it's a bonus for the team. But it's also part of a new era. You know, he had mentioned in one of the talks today, he was like, hey, last year was last year. Like that's not what we're doing. That's not the Bears right now. And I think part of, you know, talking trash about LaFleur or beating them is we're going to beat them. Like that's the expectation now. It's not one of those things of where you go into Green Bay and you're like, let's not mess up, and you know, like afraid to win or we don't want to lose by a lot. Like instead of expecting to win, like it's very different. And I'm hoping that's the mindset he's trying to give to his players through some media stuff.
I honestly, I don't know what to say with this whole thing. And the reason, because I look at it and I'm kind of just like, I'm ready for the end of July to sort of be here. Like, yes, we still got the draft, which we'll talk some Tyler Warren today. Yes, we still got, you know, OTAs. The Bears, because they have a new head coach, can officially start reporting for some of these like voluntary offseason workouts Monday, April 7th, I believe, which I believe the league moved that date up a year as well, because usually you can't do it until like the 14th or the 15th. But Ben Johnson's gonna have his like first, I guess, unofficial team meeting next week. But speaking about some of the players here, he talked to the Bears media today at the spring meetings, which to me are always kind of some of the most, I don't want to say that they're pointless, I just think that they fall on this incredibly stupid part of the calendar year. Because if I was a head coach, I'd much rather be watching film on draft prospects, not answering questions about Braxton Jones, Jaquan Brisker, and Karan. But There's still a lot of good information, right? Because you talked about how Braxton needs to get better with his anchor and needs to get his weight up. Update on Jaquan Brisker, who, again, has gone radio silent. And then a lot of really good praise, too, about Karan Amagaji, a guy that a lot of Bears fans were ready to basically write off. We obviously had the episode, I think, about 2-ish weeks ago saying don't write Karan Amagaji or Braxton Jones off. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think with Ben Johnson's comments, knowing the dynamics of this fan base, everybody's suddenly a Karan Amagaji fan.
Yeah. It's nice to be ahead of that, and nice to be ahead of, you know, we were talking about Tyler Warren and how Ben Johnson likes weapons because people think of him as a tight end, and he was talking about him in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think in a way it is, they are kind of just pointless things. I mean, I think the big thing with getting these meetings is they talk about rule changes and things like that. And we'll talk about that later. But yeah, there's a few snippets in here. I mean, one, he talked about Braxton's recovery, you know, and I know there's people that talk about, Poles made a comment of there's going to be competition, and you know what, you know, every quote, it's like, let's analyze every piece of, you know, part of every line, you know, and it's like, you know, what are they really saying? But I mean, with Braxton, he needs to better against the bull rush. We know this, and he's got to get healthy. But when he's been healthy, he's shown to be a solid left tackle, and that's what Ben Johnson said. With Kurana Magaji, he said that he liked him as a prospect. He's got great tools, which we know. And he said he wouldn't count what happened last year on film, really, because it didn't matter a lot to him, which that's what we've been saying. So, like, to me, it's nice to have a refreshing head coach that's not going to be, like, panicking, and it kind of is what it is. I mean, if Braxton isn't going to recover, y'all, and won't, he said he might be limited at the start of camp, and people are like, well, that means you have to get a tackle. What's he going to say? Like, he's for sure back by camp? He's just guessing. If he's not going to be healthy, they'll probably bring someone else in. If he's healthy, I think we'll be good to go.
And you talk about just the dynamics of not being rushed. So that to me is incredibly important because we don't know how long Braxton Jones, we don't know how long Ben Johnson is under contract. And then we obviously don't know how long Ryan Poles is under contract. Now, reading between the tea leaves here, my best guess, and again, I will be at Halas Hall for the draft in a couple weeks, so hopefully there's some additional context clues that this draft class is going to tell us a lot about how much time Poles and Ben Johnson have together. But my assumption is that Ben Johnson's as relaxed and as poised as he is, simply because he knows that he's been told by ownership, like, hey, we're giving you this much amount of time. And for him and his background, the offensive talent the Bears have, he kind of sees it as, all right, I've got more than enough time to kind of turn this thing around. Mm-hmm. Whereas with other guys in the past, it kind of would have been like, okay, we need to, 3 years time, get this whole thing turned around. If it's not turned around in 3 years, then it's going to be a real problem. Because I think you guys have to remember, going back to January, I mean, the Bears didn't even bring Ben Johnson in for this in-person interview. It was pretty much just, hey, you're the guy, get in Halas Hall, sign the contract, and then news is going to break that we're hiring you. That's essentially what it was, which, by the way, I was napping when that news broke, and then a coach of a current player a high school coach of a current Bears player on the roster was like, Ben Johnson, it is. I had one eye open. I was like, oh, cool, the Bears hired Ben Johnson. Time to start looking at draft prospects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he was always the guy, and I don't know if we've even talked about this. Maybe we did on one of our first episodes, but like, it's pretty ideal when you get like the best coaching prospect in a long time and the best quarterback prospect in a long time. And the way that Ben Johnson speaks, I don't even know that you really need to interview the guy, because anytime you hear him talk, it's really smart stuff. I mean, today he was talking about how important EPA is and how that has almost a better indication of success in winning games than turnover margin, which it used to be. And so if people aren't familiar with EPA is expected points added. And so really for every play, how much is that going to be a positive and how much is that going to be a negative? And so one thing that hasn't been factored in the past, but is now, and including the EPA, is sacks, right? When you get sacked, I think it goes, your chance of scoring on that drive goes down like 60%, like it's significant. And so you think between that, you get chunk plays. Chunk plays are huge within potentially scoring on each drive, with 20 or more yards on a play. And so all those things kind of go into it. And so this guy is really calculated. He even had another comment today, man, where he talked about like, your receiver room needs to be diverse. You can't just have all 6'4" guys, right? You have to have a mix of guys to attack defenses. It's like, this guy's smart and he gets it. So, them going to him and be like, hey, you're our guy no matter what, makes sense to me, because everything he said anytime I've heard him, I heard him in Detroit. Everything he said this guy is smart and he knows what he's doing with football, and I hope he continues it in Chicago.
And just on the topic of having a diverse receiver room, really the greater message there is you need to have a diverse set of weapons. Now, I will be fully honest with you guys. I mean, looking at Ben Johnson's offense the first year he was a coordinator in Detroit, I know that there's some of you guys that are watching this on YouTube or listening to this and saying, well, the Lions traded away DeAndre Swift. But the big thing to also keep in mind here is that the offensive coordinator rarely has influence on the moves that the GM and the head coach make, right? Yes, they go to the OC for input, but ultimately they traded away DeAndre Swift. One, because, you got Jahmyr Gibbs, which understandably, everyone was laughing at the Lions for that draft class, one that had included Sam Laporta as well as Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Jack Campbell was in the same class as well.
I was one of them laughing, though. I was for sure
okay.
laughing.
At least you admitted it, right? Me though.
Here's why. Okay, and they still had issues. So I mean, I guess I would split it down the middle. I was more upset about the Jack Campbell pick because they could have picked Christian Gonzalez, which they've had issues with the secondary since. Then they've had to draft guys, and so you can kind of split down the middle. But Jahmyr Gibbs has been a home run pick. Sam Laporte has been a home run pick. But I think part of it is, and you're probably going to jump to this, so sorry, but is like how Ben Johnson uses those weapons.
Yeah, and that ultimately is the biggest thing that people have to start sort of factoring in here. Is it's just like, just because a player is drafted high doesn't necessarily mean that guy is going to pan out. Like Tyree Wilson from that year was a player that everyone was high on. People are saying could be edge rusher one. Well, he hasn't panned out. A lot of it is circumstances, but that kind of brings me to a intriguing prospect here. Really, there's two guys in the first round that fans are not giving enough love to. First off, Tyler Warren, and number two, my favorite, Colson Loveland. Now, you can make an argument that Colson Loveland is much better as a prospect for what Ben Johnson wants to do in the passing game. And I repeat, in the passing game, than what Tyler Warren brings. Because Colson Loveland's like, whatever, 6'5", 6'6". He is, if you look at a lot of the general comparisons and you watch the film, people think he's the next coming of Sam Laporta, which, again, Iowa's tight end U in the Big Ten, at least. You look at Tyler Warren. Now, you mentioned the word fit with Jahmyr Gibbs earlier. So Tyler Warren becomes a interesting name because Ben Johnson discussed him in the press conference that he had today with Bears Beat. He also, though, went ahead and, reading between the tea leaves here, I mean, let's be honest, Tyler Warren excites Ben Johnson because this is not going to be the Detroit Lions Ben Johnson offense. This is going to be the Ben Johnson Chicago Bears offense. Tyler Warren is highly versatile. Ben Johnson's never had a player of Tyler Warren's caliber. And it makes me think that all of a sudden at 10 overall, start mocking Tyler Warren more, possibly Ashton Genty less, because tight end is a little bit more expendable than running back when you factor in a Tyler Warren Cole Kmet combination with everything Warren is able to do, because he can be your Y tight end in the slot, he can be your U tight end, he can also be your H back.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a good tight end class. I mean, you can go down the list. There's still like, I'd say 5-6 guys that I would be excited about adding to the room. But those two guys I think would be huge additions to the offense. And they're both kind of different, like you're talking about. Like they're both big, 6'5" and a half, 6'6". Colson Loveland is a much more, I think, well-rounded tight end right now in terms of route running, in terms of, I think, stemming down the field, like more of a threat there. And then Tyler Warren, I think, is a little bit more of like out-athleting people right now. And as Ben Johnson had talked about this before, and he had mentioned that, so all the coordinators, him, Ian Cunningham, Brian Poles have like watched film together of some of the top guys they would get at 10. And watching Tyler Warren, Dennis Allen's like, wow, that guy would be a problem. And part of what Ben Johnson said after that comment was because you can use him in other ways. He was a quarterback in high school. He likes trick plays. And that's how Penn State used him as a Wildcat quarterback. He used him in short yardage. He like jumped over the line. Like that's a tight end. That's kind of a weird athlete. So really you have these different types. And that's the one thing I think, as you were kind of alluding to, I think a lot of times people are like, okay, hey, this guy is picked in this round, so they have to have so many catches, so many carries, whatever. That's not how NFL teams think of these players. Think of them as how are they going to fit in certain roles? Like if you had a speed guy as a receiver, maybe his job is to get the safeties deep and not to catch all the passes, right? Or you're going to get a rotational edge rusher who's only going to be there to get pressure. They're not going to get a lot of tackles. So there's lots of ways to kind of implement them. But Tyler Warren is certainly one of those guys, I think, to talk about maybe implementing. And part of this, man, is because Ryan Poles had this talk today. And here's a comment. I'm going to read it word for word for everybody. He said, the top blue players, I think that's condensed pretty small this year in round one. And then there's a wide range of really good starting level players. They're going to range anywhere from the single digits all the way to 50, 60, 70. And so that last part, ranging from single digits all the way to 50, 60, 70, means that there's only 5, 6, 7 blue players, according to them. And then after that, it's a very, very big group. And so to me, if Tyler Warren's one of those blue players, if Ashton Genty's one of those blue players, even if it's not a premium position, maybe that's the way they're going to go because there's only so many of these difference-making guys. And you can get a number of 50, 60 guys later on in the draft.
And okay, so on the concept of tight ends, I had ChatGPT this real quickly, but just kind of going down the list here. You start to look at everything here, and let's be real, like the last 10 to 12 years have not necessarily been the kindest to some of these tight ends, right, in the first round. Because if you look back to at least the 21st century, 2000, 2001, 02, 03, 04, 05, 06, up till basically 2010, you had a decade of there was at least one tight end taken in the first round. Then from 2010 to 13, you had one. 14 to 17, you had one. Obviously, 2017, you had Njoku, Ingram, OJ Howard as well. 18, 19, you had a couple guys, right? And then 2019, 21, 24, right? So there's a big argument to be made here that as defenses go back to too high looks, as defenses start to take away the deep passing game, naturally that's going to open up a lot of tight ends opportunities for these tight ends underneath. And so then the reality of that is Ben Johnson being the innovative guy that he is, he kind of sees this. He says, hey, let's get ahead of the trend here and let's just do what few teams around the league are doing and let's basically take a tight end. And so to me, it's a 1A, 1B type situation because when it comes to Tyler Warren versus Colson Loveland, you can't really go wrong with either here. Now, if you are looking to deceive defenses a hell of a lot more, make defensive coordinators kind of scratch their head a lot more than they probably want to, and you're looking to throw defenses off guard, Tyler Warren's your guy, which we know that Ben Johnson loves his mismatch weapons. Mm-hmm. If you are looking for more so that solely pure receiving tight end who is not going to lose any explosiveness at the top of his route stems, at the top of his breaks, then Colson Loveland's ultimately your guy. Now, to me, both of them would make a hell of a lot of sense for the Bears because then what you're doing is you are basically, with a good receiving tight end, you're now making life easier for DJ Moore. You're making life easier for Rome Odunze. You are opening things up for Cole Kmet underneath. Now let's just say the Bears trot out a formation. It would not be below Ben Johnson to do this, where he's got like two running backs in the backfield plus Tyler Warren and Cole Kmet, right? So 22 personnel. All of a sudden, I'm not saying your typical like wing T personnel, but all of a sudden now what you're doing is now you're basically forcing defenses to have to account for the two running backs, plus Tyler Warren, plus Cole Kmet, and boom, I guarantee you the lone receiver on the island there would be Rome Odunze, and Odunze or Moore would be open. So there's ways to go about when teams draft these guys, they're not just thinking, okay, this guy's physicality, his traits, his intangibles, this is what he brings to the table. They're also looking at how is this guy going to fit into our scheme.
Yeah, and kind of what you're alluding to is personnel groupings, and the thing that's fun when you have like chess pieces like a Tyler Warren versus, let's say, Mercedes Lewis, is Mercedes Lewis can't line up wide, but DeAndre Swift, Ashton Genty, Tyler Warren, etc., can line up wide. And so when you do that, because here's what happens, okay, like nitty and gritty. When you have multiple coaches in the press box, you're gonna have a defensive guy, you're gonna have a defensive assistant. Defensive assistant's gonna have binoculars, and he's looking at the other offensive huddle. Who's coming in? All right, hey, 24 is coming in, 86 is coming in, etc. Okay, then they're thinking, okay, what groupings do they run? Okay, what are the percentages of them running certain plays with these groupings? Okay, then they're throwing in their defensive groupings. Okay, so it's always you see it all the time, and people were laughing. I think what was it, the Illinois game against whomever in the bowl game where they were doing the substitute changes, right? And people were like laughing because you want to match kind of skill sets for skill sets. Well, when you put in multiple tight ends, people are like, man, we don't need a tight end. But you're creating a mismatch because when two tight ends were in the game against Chicago last year, Jack Sanborn's in the game. right? Instead of maybe Kyler Gordon. So that's the game you're playing. You're like, hey, if we want to throw, we want Jack Sanborn in, and now match him up with a Tyler Warren. Things like that is kind of the games that are being played. So I agree with you. Like, that's the fun part of the game. Here's the other part, and Ben Johnson spoke to this today. Something Detroit did a lot more than Chicago, something he wants to do more moving forward, is more under center Caleb Williams to work on play action. And you're talking about those two high safeties, right? And getting ahead of how things work. Tight ends help with that because play action, they leak in the flat. They are the sift block, which is the backside block and split flow zone, and then they can leak out in the play action part of that one. So there's a lot of layers to having a piece like this. Even Ashton Genty too, y'all, because that, your run game's better, your play action game's better with the better runner, the box is going to be tighter with a better running back, like all that stuff. But that's all of the layers to the game. It's not simply like, hey, this guy's going to be a good player. It's how we're going to use these guys in personnel groupings to affect the defense to get a better, going back earlier, a better EPA per play.
Just saying, my pair of binoculars right here, ready to go in case Ben Johnson is looking for a quality control coach or something. Pretty good binoculars right here if you need some, but get them off Amazon. Okay, but see, the other big thing to look at here is this, though, is that when we look at what the Bears are ultimately doing at number 10 overall here, there's been, first off, all 32 teams are down there at these spring meetings this week, which, again, very interesting spring meetings. There's a lot of information being passed around. I, for one, am glad that I'm no longer looking like Mike Tomlin and that I don't have to stress out about Aaron Rodgers anymore, because that man looks exhausted having kind of wait for this. The second thing, though, is a former Bears head coaching candidate had kind of made a comment about Will Campbell. So this, to me, now sort of brings up the conversation of which teams are going to spoil number 10 overall for the Bears, or just the top 10 in general. It's like Mike Vrabel obviously was like, well, we as in the Patriots see Will Campbell as being a left tackle, which Nick and I were talking before the show. I mean, everything we hear coming out, at least that I hear coming out of New England, talking to beat writers there, seems to be the fact that the top 5 at least looks to go something like this. So Cam Ward, Abdul Carter, Shedeur Sanders at 3, Will Campbell at 4. If you're the Bears sitting there, I mean, does a Tyler Warren suddenly become a legit possibility? But then who are some other teams that can kind of spoil things for you? I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, dude. I feel like Jacksonville is going to be the ultimate wild card for the Bears in terms of the Bears' chances of landing Tyler Warren. At 6, I totally see the Raiders going with Ashton Genty. The Jets are probably going to go with O-line help or edge rusher help. I mean, the Jets seem to love their Michigan guys, so I would not be surprised to see them go Mason Graham. Carolina, I mean, again, total toss-up. New Orleans has been very consistent with the Jackson Dart lob, so it's just like, how there's a ton of teams that could spoil 10 for the Bears.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this before, but it's such a big discussion on Bears Twitter is Will Campbell, what position he plays. And it's not just a Nick Whalen thing. Brad Biggs talked about it in that multiple scouts he's talked to. They think he's a guard only. Some think maybe they could try him out at tackle, then move him into guard. But this is what it comes down to me, man. I look through the list here. Giants, Patriots. I was actually just looking. Jacksonville, maybe not there. Jets, because I know you got Olu Fashanu, but the other tackle is Warren Carter. I think it's Warren Carter. 4th round pick. Like, there's a multiple teams that need a tackle. If they think Will Campbell's a tackle, he's not lasting to 10. So yeah, there's a lot of teams I think that can spoil kind of what Chicago wants to do. There's been some talk of what if Chicago moves up to get one of the blue chip players. Depends on who the blue chip player is, right? But one of the things that bothers me, getting away from the arm measurements of Will Campbell, I'll just leave that one there, okay, is Mason Graham measured in short. Will Johnson measured in short. We got off the field talks about DNs. We got DNs that haven't hit production. there's just a lot of prospects that are probably going to be what the Bears have to pick from, because my gut is Genty's not going to make it. Okay. I could see, you talked about, honestly, I could see Genty going to Jacksonville, the Raiders, or the Saints. And I think Will Campbell can go to a bunch of teams there. I think Membu could go to a bunch of teams there. Obviously, Travis Hunter's not falling. Abdul Carter's not falling. There's going to be, it's going to be tough. And then I think part of it too comes down to, what are you okay with the Bears doing? So here's a fun game, man. I want to play this one with you. Okay. So I think there's certain positions we can rule out for the Bears. Okay. So, just give me a quick yay or nay. Okay. We can rule out them drafting Shedeur Sanders if he falls, right?
Yes, but I was going to troll and say, why not take a swing on a quarterback every year, in the words of former GM Ryan Poles?
Well, no trolling here. Come on, Usayd. All right.
Okay, fine.
Now let's say Tatori McMillan falls to 10 and all of the blue chip guys are gone. Would you draft him or is he a no?
I would say I would draft him. And again, here's my rationale behind it. You can never have too many good pass catchers, right? And you just had a head coach who kind of got done alluding to and saying, you need to go ahead, you need to have pass catchers that come in all shapes and sizes. And so I would definitely say yes to Tatori McMillan. Okay.
All right. So we're saying yes to receiver, potentially. Tight end, we've already said yes to. Running back, we've said yes to. I mean, we can say whatever D end, we're good with that one. Whatever D tackle, we're okay with that one. Corner, are you okay with corner if it's Will Johnson or if it's Jahdae Barron?
Will Johnson, yeah. Jahdae Barron, I'm not so sure. And the reason being is because everyone's number one is Will Johnson. Everyone's 2 or 3 kind of seems to alternate between Siobhan Revel Jr. and then Jahdae Barron.
Right. And Barron's a little bit of a nickel potentially too, and we have that. So, okay, that one's a maybe. Now, how about this? This is a little bit out there. What if they go safety? It's like Malachi Starks at 10.
I would say yes, but here's the other thing that I'm going to throw at you, and I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Safeties, number one, we know are typically not selected very high. I believe it was Minkah Fitzpatrick who was kind of the last safety selected inside. Well, no, Kyle Hamilton and Minkah Fitzpatrick, 2 of the last same guys. My question is this, though. If you're Dennis Allen, you've never had a safety of Malachi Starks' caliber on your team, right? You've always kind of had your typical, 2 high safeties. You've never had that safety who's been the 8th guy in the box. Are you willing to adapt your defensive system to make it fit with Malachi Starks? That's my ultimate question here. Yeah, some of these older D coordinators, sorry to cut you off. Some of these older D coordinators are going to be completely stingy and be like, I'm not changing my system to go ahead and to fit whatever this guy wants to do.
My answer to that would be yes, because he had Tyrann Mathieu a little bit too over there in New Orleans, and so I think he can play a little bit of both. The Honey Badger, as people remember. The fun thing with Malachi Starks' PFF comp they have is shades of Kevin Byard. And I like Kevin Byard as both a 1 high, a 2 high, and a box safety. So if you have 2 mismatch safeties, I think that can be fun in a way. But also, as you kind of alluded to, you don't feel good about it because it's not a premium position. Okay, so let's hold on that one for a minute. Okay, continue with the exercise. The top 2 linebackers, and they're very different, Jalen Walker or Jahad Campbell. What if that's the pick at 10? How do you feel?
This is tough. I would.
That's why.
And again, I will have my scouting reports and some of these linebackers coming out later this week on the Bear Report website. Kind of been focusing on O-line for right now, but you can't go wrong with either one of them. But the ultimate thing is that both of them are such different players. Mm-hmm. So it's like the Georgia guy, so Jahad Campbell to me is kind of your pure linebacker, right? Now, when I look at Jalen Walker, Jalen Walker becomes this case study. I don't think a lot of people kind of want to open up that can of worms. And the reason being is because with Walker, what you're basically getting is a hybrid hybrid linebacker / edge rusher.
Yep.
That, again, some people had him projected as a edge rusher, but to me, he's 6'1's too small to play that edge rusher position compared to some of the other guys in this draft class. So that is why having him as a linebacker makes complete sense, which, I mean, for all we know, he could essentially develop into the DeMario Davis for the Bears under Dennis Allen.
Mm-hmm. And in my mind, the name that I think of with him is like a Hassan Reddick. Remember, Hassan Reddick was kind of the smaller tweener. Then the Cardinals played him at linebacker, failed miserably. Eagles signed him cheaply, worked out okay at edge, and then he, held out with the Jets. But anyways, like that's the type of player. So overall, I did this exercise, y'all. Okay, so you guys did it too, I'm sure. Like I would name a position, you guys are like, no, Nick, you're an idiot, or yeah, I like that position, whatever. I did it for the reason of I want you guys to feel uncomfortable because that's how Chicago's going to feel. My gut is none of those blue chip players are going to make it to 10 because every GM's like, man, there's only so many blue chip guys, and then we need a quarterback. Maybe 2 quarterbacks go. That's going to be eight spots. Then there's 9, 10. So you're going to have to be like, I don't know about this guy, and that's probably what the Bears are going to pick. And then if they're like, well, Usayd, why don't they just trade down? Because who wants to trade up for when they can just sit there and take that at their own pick and save picks? So I think we're going to study prospects, y'all. We're going to talk through it over the next few weeks. But I think we got to start thinking of like, okay, if they want another safety, if it's best player available, what if it is McMillan? What if it is a linebacker? What if it is a tweener D-end, Mike Green, who's smaller, and we don't know about the off the field stuff? Maybe it's Kenneth Grant, a huge one-tech D tackle. I think we need to be open to a lot more possibilities because I feel like Bears Twitter is very honed in on Ashton Genty, offensive line. That's pretty much it. Hoping Mason Graham falls. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen, man.
So, okay, you had kind of alluded to this. Now, let's do this exercise, okay? So, you're the Bears. You're sitting there at 10, okay? Looking at some of these other teams, you got San Francisco, Dallas, Miami, Indy, Atlanta, Arizona, Cincy, Seattle, Tampa, and then Denver, okay? Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the first round. I mean, I just rattled off 11 to 20 sort of right there. And then 21 is Pittsburgh, and 22 is the Chargers. So my question ultimately to you is this, is which of these teams do you think, because we know it takes 2 to tango, I mean, which of those teams are you picking to possibly trade up to 10, if you had to sort of guess right now? Because to me, in my mind, the way that I look at this thing is that this is probably, I shouldn't even say probably, I should say this is the worst year to be a team like the Bears to want to trade out of your draft slot so a team can kind of make up and get the jump. Because you start crossing the positions off. And why do teams trade up? We know that teams always trade up for quarterbacks. Well, guess what? 11 to 20, none of those teams need a quarterback, right? So you can cross that off. Is anyone trading up for a running back? I'm going to say probably not, because deep running back class. You don't get Ashton Genty.
No, the only way they would is if Genty's there at 10 and the Bears are like, hey, I guess we'll trade down instead of drafting Genty, which Bears Twitter might just like be lit on fire. And to me, that team would be Denver, because that's a big part of Sean Payton's game plan is he runs the ball a ton. I think O-line could be the case, but I think you might be further down the list. Like let's say you're, for the exercise, I would say Seattle potentially. They need O-line help badly. Like if they want to get ahead of, because I think honestly, San Francisco, Dallas, Miami, all those teams could go O-line. Atlanta, they just lost Dahlman. So Seattle could jump them to maybe get whomever they want to place, whatever. It could be interior O-line. But if you go down further, think of Houston. Houston is desperate for O-line help, right? They might trade up. The other one is Kansas City. Are you willing to go down from 10 to 31 and gain, I don't know, you might be even a future one. No, it's Kansas City, though, because they come up and they're going to take a shot on Josh Simmons.
And I'm going to tease all of you, drop this little tidbit here. Nick, I know you're going to hate me for this, but there is something about a certain general manager for one sports organization here in Chicago that loves to go back to his old stomping grounds and seemingly work the phones every single year to try and figure out what his old organization is thinking in terms of a potential trade. So do with that passive aggressive information what you will. But okay, so which I was supposed to tell you this a few weeks ago. I will tell you that after the show. All right. But anyways, okay. So here's the other big thing. I'm looking at Houston's draft capital right now, and the Texans again become a very intriguing trade possibility. So they have 25. You've got 58, 79, and 89. Okay. Then you've got 166, 236, and 241. Now, in my mind, if I am Houston, I'm kind of looking at this thing, and I know our shows have been going longer than usual, but listen, people, we got like 20-something days till the draft. You guys love hearing us talk, so there's that, okay? Or you love hearing Nick talk, not me necessarily. But okay, so if you're the Bears, are you okay with a trade package that includes 25 in exchange for the 10th overall? 25, 58, and 89, let's say, because then that gives you 25, 39, 41, 58, and 89, in addition to having 72. So you basically get like what? 6 picks right there inside the top 100, meaning you are effectively getting better value and bigger bang for your buck in order to go ahead and kind of add to this roster. And that opens up your draft class in terms of the flexibility, simply because now you are using those additional second and third round picks, which are all evenly spaced out, by the way, to go ahead and to add even more depth to a roster that is top heavy with talent, but there's so many questions about the depth that remain.
I would. Now I haven't even, I haven't calculated, I haven't looked at the, the draft trade charts, but again, I think if the Bears trade down from 10, you said they're not going to get as much value. Like it's going to be, I don't even know what it's worth. Like if their pick is worth 1,300, they might get 1,200 back in value or 1,150 back in value. And people are like, well, that's stupid. They got ripped off. It's a guide. Every year, as we've talked through, there's a group of prospects that everyone wants. And after that, it's like, if you want to move down, you're probably not going to get as much as you want. It's like sometimes you're going to sell your car for a little less than what Kelly Blue Book says it's worth, and you're gonna have to live with it, or you keep the car. So to me, I think I would, just based off of what the Bears need. I think they need a little bit more picks instead of one really big pick. But I want to shift the conversation, man. I got one more thing left before the pod. I think this could be a longer discussion a little bit. All right. There is, or do you have something or no?
Well, I was going to say, okay, let's just say you don't trade down with Houston. Another team that I think is going to be desperate to get a top 10 pick, Cincinnati, right? Because they've got 17, 49, 81, 119, 153, and 193. The Bengals seem to be in desperation mode. That's why they paid their receivers. Now they got to kind of back it up, right? They need more offensive line help. So don't rule out Cincinnati necessarily either. But go ahead.
Well, see, and I would love them, right? I'm assuming you would get their 2. If it's just even 17 and their 2, I think I'd be okay with it. But then you're in a range where I think you gamble a lot more on a Mike Green type. You know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, we have insulated another 2. I really like Mike Green, y'all, in terms of his film. Anyway, I think his film he could be a game changer for that D line in terms of pressure, turning the corner. And really just helping, because Montez is a little bit more of a run stopping D end. He can still rush the passer, and Dio's a little raw. I just think it'd be a great group. But anyways, so here's the part that I want to get to. Something else happens at these owners meetings. They vote on stuff, and they voted. And again, I'm not going to talk about the tush push, okay? Unless you really want to get into it, Usayd. I'm going to talk about they've moved the kickoff touchback from the 30 to the 35. And to me, every yard, but I see charts, man, it's every 5 yards. Every 5 yards, you're closer. The percentage of drives that end in touchdowns or points obviously increases, right? And so moving forward 5 yards, I think is going to increase kick returns significantly because they're like, we don't want to give it to them on 35. We're going to do whether they squib it or they pop it up in the air, whatever. And there's going to be more return kicks, which, what makes that awesome, man, is that we have a Pro Bowl kick returner in Devin Duvernay in Chicago. So you wonder if the Bears had a little bit of, insight into, hey, I think this is how this is going to go. We want to make sure we have a really good returner for this. And the other big benefit, besides having a good kick returner, right? So let's say the Bears have 2 more yards than the average NFL team based off kick returns starting drives. That's going to be more points in the long run. Is if field position is going to be a bigger battle, having a very good punter is going to be more important next year than it was this past year. And Torrey Taylor, I think, getting his feet wet, he had a good year last year, but he'll have a better year. I think next year is going to be even better in terms of the Bears' outcomes of winning games and playoffs, etc.
And you talk about it's a change in field position for offenses is what it is, right? Because you kick it through the end zone, now you're starting at the 35-yard line, which, again, if I'm doing my math correctly, you got 65-ish yards to go before you score a touchdown, whatever the math is, right? I sucked at math growing up.
It's 65, so, yeah.
Yeah, 65. Okay, so that was the one thing that I'm pretty sure I learned from math class. But here's the other part of this, okay? Is that your EPA numbers, looping this back here, are going to be significantly higher than what we may be expected. Right, because now your EPA numbers all of a sudden are going to go from, and again, visual representation, if you're watching us on YouTube, they're going to go from here to sort of here in terms of what the league's basically trying to do. And I think part of this sort of change in philosophy is also the fact that the league and the competition committee kind of recognize the fact that, dang, these defenses have really slowed these offenses down over the last couple of years because it's not like it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. So we're going to bring this in to go ahead and combat it. But the other part of this whole thing that I think gets very interesting is that now if you are any offensive coordinator or any play caller, your entire dynamic suddenly changes in terms of what are your first 15 coming out. If you do start the game with a touchback, how does your play calling sort of change here? Simply because what you're doing is you are going from basically being on the 30-yard line to now basically being on the 35. Well, maybe you do end up seeing more opening game drive sort of passes than you see runs normally. So it's a decision that just doesn't impact the kickoff, kick return stuff, right? Special teams. Mm-hmm. It impacts your offense. It impacts your defense. It now suddenly impacts the way that quarterbacks and offensive coordinators are going to start to think as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I mean, you need about 25 yards to be in field goal range for most kickers. Probably not Cairo Santos, which is a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I think it changes things. And so, with the rule changes, the whatever you want to call it, how they prepare for games and how they're personnel, their game planning, their script, everything changes. So to me, I think it's exciting that we have the kick returner, Devin Duvernay, and I don't think it's going to be like, the draft is going to be significantly different because of these rule changes, but I think it's something that benefits Chicago. And so whenever you can have a few more things that go Chicago's way, the schedule is going to be tough this year, y'all. We'll talk about that in another episode, but I think that's really going to be beneficial in terms of them, being first, second, third in the division, and fighting for a playoff spot.
Which we certainly hope the Bears make a handful of moves this offseason to end up being a playoff contender. A handful of moves in the NFL draft coming up in about 2.5 to 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks from this Thursday, but we'll be back Thursday afternoon with another really good episode. Before we get out of here, make sure you're checking Nick and I out on Twitter at _Nick Whalen, at Usayd Koshul, at Halas Beat on Twitter. Check out the Bear Report website. We're going to have a lot of really cool stuff for you guys over the next few weeks. Make sure that you are locked into the Bear Report website. I am publishing scouting reports left and right for a lot of the prospects that the Bears have a chance on. And then if you guys are a premium subscriber, well, Zach Pearson's going to have a VIP big board for you guys to go ahead and view. There's always a lot of really good nuggets on that. If you're not a subscriber on the website, I highly recommend that you kind of get signed up with a membership. Bear down. We will see you guys next time.